Looks like it is just 12:30 on the dot. I want to thank everyone for joining us. We are the University of South Dakota, OLLI. My office is in Sioux Falls, but we've got people joining us from all over the state. And some, I think we have a couple probably from different parts of the country as well. Today we're going to learn about genealogy with Wendy Stubbs.
Hi everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I am president of the Sioux Valley Genealogical Society here in Sioux Falls, and I have a presentation to share with you today, and feel free to interrupt me as we go along. I mean, it's such a large topic that I could probably spend 3 hours talking about it, but we don't have that kind of time. I think it's what, 20 minutes?
Yeah, we would like to be done by 1 o'clock. Hopefully there's some questions and stuff we'll have time for afterwards, or like you said, to interrupt. So
great. And I have permission to share my screen, do I?
Absolutely, yes.
I'm just trying to figure out how to do that. That's all. Hang on. Is it under view that I share that?
So share screen on the bottom. Well, it's on the bottom of my Zoom screen. Do you have a green arrow that says?
Yes, I do. There it is. Okay, I see it now. That was too easy. All right. So let me start this from the beginning. Okay, so beginning genealogy 101, how to begin researching your ancestors. And there's my email address there. If you want to ever ask me a question, you're welcome to do that. I would be glad to answer any questions as well if you think of them afterwards. So let's talk about some objectives. We could certainly examine reasons why you should start genealogy research, look at some various software programs to use, utilize some forms that you can use, and understand the terminology related to genealogy because it's kind of a big topic. So first of all, why would we want to do this? Well, interestingly enough, you can learn a lot of unknown facts about your ancestors, which is sometimes good and maybe sometimes not good. It's a way or system to keep track of information that you find. You can prepare materials for future generations, and you can also preserve historical stories or information for upcoming generations. And I'll talk about that a little bit too. So what is genealogy? Well, it means a lot of things to different people, but what it really is just the study of family history, of the tracing of your lineages. You can look at kinship and pedigrees. You can create a family tree, which is a visual way to present the information, and there are different ways to present that. Oftentimes when we use a software, they have a certain way to present that, and I'll talk about that as well. There can become a lot of self-satisfaction in also preserving this. For me personally, I think it's about people and about the family stories. It's not about just facts. To me, it's about all the neat stories that you can learn from talking to your family members and then preserving that information. So DNA is a hot topic right now. If you watch any of those shows where they capture criminals because of DNA research, that's been a big deal right now because they're doing that. Even some of the cold cases that come about, they have cells from DNA, and they can examine that and find people in ancestry or family trees. So the lineage is your line of descendants, whether it's a father or the mother line. You have people before you and people after you within a family tree. And so really a family tree is just an ancestral line, a chart of ancestors and the descendants. Some people like to do just their direct descendants, but some people like to also include, let's say, aunts and uncles and their children and so on. And that's a personal choice that you can make. So it can be really interesting. Oftentimes I get these questions like this: well, how am I related to somebody? And there's a relationship chart that we go by. But what happens lots of times is these second and third cousins here, lots of times have information that is very helpful. For instance, in a group in Facebook about the Norwegian region that my ancestors are from, I just had a third cousin post a picture of his great-great-grandfather that have to be my great-great-uncle. And so as we're talking about this, I realized that his family was originally from Canton, South Dakota. but he now is in Maine. And here there are several people from Norway who also said they were related. So because of that one picture and that one posting, I made several connections within that group. And I thought that was really pretty cool. So the social media can be really helpful. However, there can be some unexpected outcomes when you do this. People sometimes learn that their biological dad is not really their actual biological dad. That has happened sometimes, so that can be sometimes upsetting to people. You can also discover unknown medical history, which can be really a good thing. And you can also find maybe ethnicity or relatives that you're not aware of. Many people, when they do a DNA test, find out what percentage they are of a certain race. And interestingly enough, I know many people will say, oh, I'm part Native American, but then maybe that doesn't show up on their DNA. So because of family stories, lots of times we're passed down information that might not be accurate. And so that becomes interesting because you can prove or disprove some of those family stories. So when you get started, what I tell people is, first of all, just write down what you already know. You probably know your parents and maybe their birth dates. And so there are lots of charts that exist online that are free. And you can just download those and start filling that information out. And you're probably not going to know everything. So you're probably going to have to do a little bit of research to find out. What's helpful today is that a lot of these records are online. Everything is not online, however, and that's where you can turn to other resources, and I'll talk about those resources. So for instance, here's my chart in Ancestry going back 4 generations, and I have it pretty much filled out here, and I have a lot of information on these. So I've been pretty lucky. In Ancestry, they have what they call this green leaf here, and that means there's a hint. And it can be really interesting because lots of times that information is really helpful. But here's the problem. Sometimes that information is not accurate. Sometimes some of these people listed here are not your actual relatives, and something within someone else's family tree led you to believe that. I'm pretty sure that mine are accurate here, but I have before made mistakes and connected to the wrong person. So you really have to be careful about accepting all of those hints. You have to make sure that there are sources for that information that are accurate and reliable. So when I talked about DNA, this is what an example of a DNA testing looks like. So I'm 29% Norwegian, 25% England and Northwestern Europe. So what happens, you guys, is these percentages change. As they get more in their database, these will change. My Norwegian has gotten higher. Remember that a lot of the Vikings traveled a lot throughout Europe. So sometimes that throws people off. And some of these countries have changed too, don't forget. Certainly the Germanic and the Russian countries, a lot of those have changed. So you might say you're from one part of the country, but now it's got a different border or a different country name. So that makes a difference too. My Irish keeps on increasing the more often I get these results. So that's interesting too, I think. So that can be really fascinating, I think. And a lot of people really love doing the DNA just to find that out. So how to find your records are important. You might want birth records, death records, marriage, divorce, adoption, census. We're pretty excited as a genealogist because in April 1st, the 1950 census becomes available. Every 72 years, they are made available. And so that's really important for a lot of genealogists. You can order a lot of those records from a county courthouse. So don't be afraid to call them up or look at their website and see what you can order, oftentimes right online. A lot of them can also be found online through different websites like FamilySearch.org or Ancestry. FamilySearch.org is run by the LDS Church and is free. So you can have a free account there and it has a lot of great information. The one thing that's different though is that it's one big tree. So your Jane Doe that's in that tree might be in somebody else's tree as a relative. So someone else can also change that. So that can be good or bad. In Ancestry, you can have multiple trees that's just your lineage, just however you set it up, whatever names you put in it. So there are differences. Ancestry does cost money. So you have to decide at what level you want to pay. You can have a free account in there, however, and once you pay for a tree there, it doesn't go away even if you decide to not pay. The information is still there. So that's pretty helpful. Those are probably the two most common, but there are others. So I caution people because we talk about the genealogy rabbit hole or brick wall, where it can be addicting. It can take up a lot of time, but you can really get stuck pretty easily too. Sometimes it's really hard to find information about some groups in some countries. So you need to avoid that by planning your research. Avoid that green leaf and ancestry somewhat, because it can be too easy to just accept everything. And their brick walls can be very frustrating. By brick wall, I mean something that you can't find information on somebody. You can't find the birth record or the adoption record or when they came over to America or whatever. And it just takes a while to find it. I suggest that people keep a research log setting goals. All right, I'm going to work on this family line for a little bit. I say that, but I'll tell you what, that's hard to do, because what happens is when you get into these websites and you see these hints or these ideas, then you kind of go down that rabbit hole and do something completely different. So I have to be really careful of that myself, that I don't do that. There are many genealogical libraries to visit, and I say many, and these are all really good ones. Part of that depends upon what it is you're trying to find. For instance, we have the library here in Sioux Falls, the Genealogical Library at the Old Courthouse Museum. And we have a lot of information there and a lot of resources. People would be surprised, but we certainly don't have everything. The Family History Library Centers, which are wherever there's an LDS church, they have access to all the information that's in the Salt Lake City Library, which is probably the largest or one of the largest in America. So that's another way you can get that information. So the big ones here are at the top that are really big. Fort Wayne, Indiana claims to have one of the biggest, as well as the Salt Lake City Library. I've been to the one in Salt Lake City, and they have free people who will sit down with you and help you and guide you through it. They are digitizing more and more of their records, so an awful lot of that is online. And so are a lot of these other libraries. They put an awful lot of information online in their websites that you can have access to. I have not used the Library of Congress yet, but I understand it can be very helpful for information. Now, if you're looking for military records, a lot of those are through the National Archive out of St. Louis, and you can get copies of a lot of that there. But I'm going to tell you something, a lot of records got burned in a fire many, many, many years ago. So a lot of the World War II records are lost. My dad's records can't be found because of that. Those records were burned in a fire. But military records can be really a good resource as well. So there are some really good libraries here to access. And I suggest if you want to get started, maybe start at our local one, and then we can kind of help guide you where you need to go. For instance, if you're researching Norwegian information, there are Norwegian, what we call bygdebooks, which is a history of the farm village, and it's a history of families within that farm and village. And a lot of your Midwest libraries especially have those. UND, for instance, does, University of Minnesota, places like that. Danish records, a lot of those are in the Elkhorn, Iowa, Genealogical Library and Museum. So sometimes some of that stuff is more localized depending upon the ethnicity and the group of people that settled there. So here's some regional libraries, as I've mentioned. These ones here, okay, this would be highly Norwegian. Decora Genealogy has a lot of Norwegian. Danish America has a lot of Danish records. Minnesota has a large Norwegian, and I'm sure other things as well. Sioux Valley, we do have some bygdebooks for Norwegian, but not all of them. And then, as I mentioned, the family history centers, wherever there's an LDS church, they have access to that. And oftentimes those people at those libraries can be very helpful too. So don't be afraid to ask them. Now, there are some software programs, as I've mentioned, that are very, very helpful. Ancestry.com is fee-based. You saw that example of what my tree looked like there. FamilySearch.org is very helpful, and it's from the LDS Church. It's part of their church philosophy that family is important, and that's why they keep these records. FindMyPast.com is another one, and then MyHeritage. I have discovered that my Norwegian relatives use two of them a great deal. They use MyHeritage or actually Geni.com, Geni. I don't know why, but those seem to be really popular in Norway, MyHeritage and Geni. So I also have accounts on them. And one of the reasons why you might want an account on more than one, even a free account, is because you can, if people can access your information, then they can help you out and you can see their hints and their information. So I find that very, very helpful. You'd be surprised how people from another country or another part of our country can be very helpful in helping you do genealogy research to connect. And so don't be afraid to use those. I've met some second and third cousins just because of doing genealogy research. Some from Canada and all over the country, and in Norway, I've visited with people online. So it is amazing how people can be really, really helpful. I had an instance where on Ancestry, I had a message board that I put out, and somebody from Denmark replied, and she went to my church of my great-great-grandfather and took pictures. And I have pictures of the church, and she talked to somebody from the church, and somebody from the church emailed me with history of my family and his family there in that church. And they discussed about how one of my relatives and his relative got mad at the minister because of the way they said the Lord's Prayer, and they switched parishes. So look at that family story I have that I would have never had. And not only that, but the place where my great-great-grandfather lived in Denmark is now a toy factory. And I emailed him and he sent me pictures. And so I know what the whole area looks like. And he said, if you ever come over here, I'm going to give you a free tour and everything, because the buildings are still standing. So there's just so much history like that that you can find out because of the internet and the World Wide Web and all the information that's out there. It really is truly amazing how you can connect with people. I also connected with a Norwegian relative many years ago and got started on that path. And then know a whole bunch of Norwegian relatives that I have over there. And again, I've got a place where I can stay if I want to go over there and visit people with the original farm. So I'm totally amazed at the information you can find out by just connecting with some of those second and third cousins, because they can often be very helpful. There are some places where you can get genealogy forms, and I listed those. There are lots of places that actually have them. Cindy's List is a website that lists all kinds of information about genealogy. I mean, that really is a good one to refer to because there's so much out there. And you just need to maybe take a look at her website and just see how that could be helpful for you. The Family Tree magazine has a lot of free information. They obviously have a magazine they put out about genealogy. And then, of course, the archives from the government has a lot of information as well. And that's probably one I don't use enough, that I probably need to use more of, but that one really is a handy site. So there are some mistakes to avoid: accepting information from other family trees as gospel and just using it. You really need to make sure it has a reliable source connected with it. If you include every hint or leaf in Ancestry, it's easy to make a mistake there, because I've done that. So you need to think about what is an acceptable source for documentation. Usually something that's an official record: birth record, marriage, divorce, records from maybe Ellis Island that they've come over here, things like that. My grandmother on my dad's side used to say that we were related to John Quincy Adams and John Adams. Well, there were several of us in the family who did a lot of research on that. I had a cousin who wrote a family book. She did not prove it. We finally found the proof, and we were very distantly related, like about 6 cousins or 7 cousins. It was so distant that it really wasn't very close. So you have to be careful about those family stories that people tell, because sometimes they'll make it sound like you're really close to somebody when you're really not. So that's something. I'm a strong believer in interviewing elder relatives for history and the stories that they have. Recording them in audio or video is always a good idea. I think we're losing a lot in our society on that information from having all those family stories shared, because, man, people have some great stories. When you think about the generation before the baby boomers and what they've gone through in their lifetime, that's a lot of neat knowledge, because some of them went through an awful lot. Not only did some go through the Depression, but they also went through a couple of world wars, plus the Korean War. So there's a lot of information there that I fear is going to get lost. I certainly wish I would have interviewed my grandparents and gotten some things recorded from them. I had a great aunts that came over from Norway, and she told me a little bit, but I wish I would have gotten it all recorded rather than just from my memory, because it's going to get lost. And then being careful to keep just only paper copies, because you really want to think about a backup of all your material. Gosh, if you had a fire, you'd lose all that. So there's a couple different ways you can store that, whether it's on a CD or on your computer, but I also recommend keeping it on cloud storage, because then that's going to be there. So there's some other useful sites for reference here. I mentioned Cindy's list. There's a family search wiki that they have that's really, really helpful. Find a grave list where people are buried, and that's really, really helpful. Many of those people that have entered that information will enter in obituaries. And many times you can see some relations of people because they'll list siblings or spouses or children in that listing as well. So that to me is really a valuable resource, that Find a Grave. I look at that a great deal. And not to mention Ellis Island site, because many of our ancestors came over through Ellis Island. I've actually been there, and it's really a cool place to see. You can actually be in the room where the immigrants came in and stood, and then you can kind of takes you through what did this ancestor go through when they had to go through all the line, and what did they have to do, and the paperwork and stuff. And it's really a fascinating place. So if you get a chance to go there, go there. But they also have a lot of that information online. And what's good about a lot of that information is they'll tell you the ship they came over on, who was on that ship. You might have other relatives on it. And usually that information will tell you who sponsored them over here, which can be very, very helpful, because then it might be a relative or a neighbor, old neighbor, or a friend who sponsored them. And that can give you another clue sometimes. So for the Sioux Valley Genealogical Library, we have a lot of information there. Old city phone directories, you know, that's the thing for the past. You guys remember that. We don't hardly make them anymore. But the old ones told not only where people lived, but who lived in the household and where people worked. So if you look at the old city ones in Sioux Falls, there were a lot of people that worked at John Morrell's. And then think about where they lived in the city. You know, Sioux Falls has changed as a city, so a lot of them lived in the central part of the city there. So you can also find out where they lived and see if the buildings are still there. One of my great uncles lived where Raven Building is right now downtown in the parking lot. That was where his house was. So see, there used to be houses along there. So it's information like that that you can find out where people lived. That's quite interesting. Many families have donated their family histories there that they've written, and they've donated them. And then there are some city histories of various cities in the region that are there. We have past newsletters of many genealogy societies that put newsletters out. I mentioned the Norwegian Bygda books, and those are quite helpful. If you've got Norwegian background, there's a lot of good information in those. We have a lot of obituaries and databases of obituaries in the region, which people often like to have copies of. And we have what's called a pioneer certificate. If you had a relative here before South Dakota was a state, you can apply to get a pioneer certificate. And it's a pretty cool document. There is some information on our website that shows what you need to do for that. And we have a lot of people who apply for those. Plus, we have plat books and maps. For instance, online, I can find a 1910 plat book of South Dakota and all the townships. And to me, those plat books are informational, because you can see where people lived and who they lived by. And that can be really, really helpful, because then you know where they actually lived in that community when they moved here. And then, of course, we have some old college yearbooks as well as genealogy forms. We have an awful lot of information there, so don't be afraid to stop in. We're usually open up in the afternoons, Monday through Friday, about 12 to 4, 1 to 4. So don't be afraid to call us up ahead of time and find out if we're open. We have our 50th celebration coming up in June. We're going to feature D. Joshua Taylor as our keynote speaker. He is the president of the New York Genealogy Society, and he'll be giving a full day of speaking on the 4th and a short talk on the night of the 3rd. So if you're interested in that, take a look at our website and see if that's something that interests you. We'll be having that form on there very soon to download and send in your fee for that. I think it's going to cost $40 for a member and $50 for a non-member. And then there's a luncheon on Saturday that you can pay for $15. So if you're interested in that type of a thing, you'll make some really good connections. and learn quite a bit about genealogy. So there are my references and contact information. I want to leave those with you. You're welcome to a copy of this presentation, and I believe Stacy said she'll put it online on their Facebook too, the recording. So if you need to look at anything, but you certainly can contact me if you have any questions. I certainly want you to do that. So now let me open up to you guys and see if you have any questions.
You are right. I think you could have a 3-hour class on this. This is really interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot I could talk about.
Wow. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, just feel free to unmute and ask away.
I have a question.
Yes.
You said your results, you know, your DNA results, your percentages and stuff are constantly changing. Does that mean you're sending in new samples, or do they just update it?
No, they update it depending upon how many samples they receive. And Ancestry has the largest database of DNA samples, but it changes because they get more information from people. I don't have a clue how they figure this stuff out, but I just know that they do change a little bit, and my Norwegian has gone up a little bit. So yeah, it does change.
Wow. Anyone else have a question for Wendy? Yeah, be careful what you wish for, though. I put in the chat, I found out that I have a brother. I found out through 23andMe back in September, and he lives down the street on Highway 11.
Wow, that is amazing. I've heard that from quite a few people, actually. They find out they have a sibling. Sometimes, for one reason or another, parents aren't honest, or they don't want to talk about something, or it's embarrassing, or maybe it was a bad situation in their life at the time. Who knows? But I've heard from a lot of people that has happened, or sometimes their biological dad is not their biological dad. That's what they think. So, I mean, that can be a little bit maybe upsetting to people for sure. And I do get that. But on the other hand, sometimes people can gain family members that they think is pretty cool too. So have you been in touch with him, Stacy? Does he know you?
Yeah, so my sister had put in, she had done the test and it came up right away that here's your half sibling. So she messaged, there was 4 girls. I have 3 other sisters. She messaged us and says, hey, I think we have a brother. And my dad didn't have any idea. He was never told that he existed either. So we met him right away, and we had Thanksgiving at my house, and my dad met his son for the first time, and it was really cool. So I gained a brother, a sister-in-law, and 2 nieces.
Wow, that's really a cool story. I'm glad that turned out well for you, because sometimes it does not.
I can imagine.
So someone asks about, is every person who immigrated from Europe legally recorded somewhere? Well, that's a really good question, because that's not necessarily true. And here's the deal, you guys. Some of them came through Ellis Island. Some of them came through, there was another place right there on Manhattan that they came through before that called Castle Island. And some went through Canada. I have a harder time finding the ones through Canada, but supposedly those records do exist. So it might depend upon what port they came in from. We would hope they would all be recorded, but that may not necessarily be true. But that's for a genealogist. We've got a research person with our society that can help you with that. You can email research@SiouxValleyGenealogicalSociety.org, and they would love to help you with that. We have some really sharp people in our society that have done genealogy a long time and really can help people find the right resources and where to turn.
Great. And I'm assuming if anybody wants to email us here at OLLI, we're just a super easy email, olli@usd.edu. We can get you in touch with Wendy as well.
Yeah, we'd be glad to help you. And we encourage you, if you want to join our society, it's only $20 a year. So it's not expensive. We have some great meetings, great people to really help people out and learn more. And we have a lot of fun doing it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was great. And thank you everyone for joining us. And tomorrow join us again for another OLLI Shorts. And like I said, if you guys want to get in touch with Wendy, we can certainly forward your info on. So we appreciate
Thank you, you guys. Appreciate you coming.
Everybody have a great day. Thank you.